You people don't belong here. That was the sentence. Loud, sharp, like a slap that didn't need a hand. It came from the mouth of a white lounge supervisor named Martin Hale, directed straight at a calm, well-dressed black man standing in front of the first-class lounge at LAX. Those 6 words. You people don't belong here weren't just rude. They were loaded. A mix of arrogance, ignorance, and something uglier. Something that made every head in the room turn, and every phone camera quietly flip on. Before we dive in, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe respect shouldn't depend on skin color, hit like and subscribe, because in the next 24 hours, everything changed. The man on the receiving end of that remark was Elijah Grant. Tall, mid-40s, clean cut. He was wearing a charcoal gray overcoat and carried a simple leather briefcase. No logos, no noise, just a quiet kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. Elijah had just stepped up to the Altura Airways first-class lounge entrance. Boarding pass in hand. Reservation confirmed. Gate C7. Destination, Seattle. The woman at the front desk had barely glanced at his ticket before motioning for her supervisor. That's when Martin Hale appeared. And that's when the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Martin was the type who thought the uniform made the man navy blazer, lapel pin, earpiece, like he was guarding a vault instead of greeting paying customers, without even greeting Elijah. He looked at the boarding pass, then looked Elijah up and down, and with a clipped tone that echoed across the polished floors, he said, "Sir, this lounge is for our premium guests only," Elijah calmly responded. "I am a premium guest." Martin didn't even blink. "We'll need to verify that." He didn't ask. He stated it, like Elijah was already under suspicion. What happened next took less than a minute. Martin glanced at the screen, then back at Elijah. "We've seen this before," he said. "Third-party bookings, mismatched IDs, people gaming the system." That's when it came. "You people don't belong here." And with that, Martin turned to a nearby staff member and muttered, "Call airport security," loud enough for everyone around to hear. Elijah stood silent for a moment, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew exactly what had just happened, and how familiar it was. Off to the side, a white woman named Sandra Evans, who had been filming a little video for her kids while waiting for her own flight, instinctively hit record. She hadn't planned on posting it, not right away. But something about the way Elijah didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, just stood there, calm, quiet, dignified, made her uncomfortable. And it made her wonder how many times something like this happened without a camera pointed in the right direction. Elijah looked at Martin and simply said, "I've shown you my ID and boarding pass. Is there another reason I'm being denied entry?" Martin, already turning his back, muttered, "We'll let security sort that out." Moments later, Officer Paul Jennings arrived, middle-aged, tired-eyed, and already annoyed that he'd been pulled off his rotation for something that didn't feel like an emergency. He walked up and said, "Sir, I need you to step aside with me." Elijah didn't resist, didn't raise his voice. He just said, "Am I being accused of anything?" Paul responded. "I don't know. I was told you were causing a disruption." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Asking to be let into a lounge I paid for is a disruption?" All around, people were whispering, a few passengers, some uncomfortable, some clearly agreeing with Martin, watched in silence, but others looked embarrassed, ashamed, even. One younger white man in a business suit looked at his own platinum boarding pass and then looked at Elijah's, which was still visible. Same flight, same class, no difference. And yet one of them had been asked to leave. Guess which? As Officer Jennings escorted Elijah away. Sandra's phone buzzed. Her video had already gotten a few dozen views. She hadn't tagged anything. She hadn't said much. Just posted the raw clip with the caption, "I don't know what I just witnessed, but it didn't feel right." In an hour, it would hit 1,000 views. In 3 hours, it would pass 100,000. And within the day, the man they thought didn't belong would be sitting in a very different room, one with a lot more power behind its doors. But back at LAX, Elijah sat near gate C7, quietly opening his phone. The lounge was behind him now. So was the flight. His seat had likely already been reassigned. He didn't say a word to the gate agents, didn't demand compensation. Instead, he texted someone named Laura. "Move the meeting up, today, and I need Rachel and Andre in the room." That was it. Across from him, a flight attendant named Kimberly Young was walking by on her way to another gate. She recognized Elijah, though she couldn't quite place him. She paused, seeing him sitting alone in that calm, collected posture she'd only seen in boardrooms or documentaries. She leaned in and asked, "Are you okay?" Elijah looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "They just told me I don't belong here." Kimberly blinked. "Sir, with all due respect, they clearly have no idea who you are." And she was right. They didn't. But they were about to find out, because this story wasn't over. It was just beginning. By the time Officer Paul Jennings arrived at the first-class lounge, Elijah Grant was already standing off to the side, arms crossed, not in defiance, but in quiet disbelief. The officer had seen his share of travel disputes, loud passengers, unruly tourists, drunken complaints. But this man, he didn't look like trouble. He looked tired, disappointed, and frankly, insulted. Paul glanced at Martin Hale, who stood behind the podium with his arms folded like a man guarding a vault. Martin gave a quick summary. "He tried to enter with what we believe is an invalid ticket, wouldn't cooperate, got hostile." Elijah turned, raising a brow. "Hostile? I said 10 words. You didn't even scan the ticket." Martin didn't budge. "I don't make the rules. Sir, I enforce standards. If something feels off, I escalate." And that was the heart of it. If something feels off, not a policy, not a procedure, just a feeling, a gut instinct built on decades of assumptions. Paul looked between the two men and sighed. "Mr. Grant, I'm going to need you to come with me just to sort this out." Elijah gave one long look around the lounge, at the passengers pretending not to listen, at the staff pretending to be busy, and nodded. "Of course. Lead the way." As they walked through the terminal toward the security office, the air around them grew heavier, not physically, but emotionally. People were watching. A few pulled out their phones. A man muttered. "What did he even do?" A woman near a cafe whispered to her husband. "That's not the guy from the video, is it?" Word was spreading. Sandra's clip was already making the rounds on X, and someone else had just uploaded a TikTok video of Elijah being escorted out. The caption was simple. "All this for having a first-class ticket while black?" Inside the small airport security office, Paul offered Elijah a seat. "Let me take a quick look at your documents again." Elijah handed over his boarding pass and ID without hesitation. Paul scanned it on his terminal and waited. 30 seconds later, the result blinked back on the screen. Confirmed first-class ticket, issued directly through Altura Airways. Nothing suspicious. No flags. Paul looked up slowly, then turned the monitor slightly so Elijah could see for himself. "You're cleared. I don't see any reason you should have been stopped." Elijah let out a quiet breath. Not relief, but a confirmation of what he already knew. "That didn't stop them, did it?" Paul rubbed the back of his neck. "No, sir, it didn't. But to be honest with you, I think this is about something else entirely." Elijah nodded. It usually is. Meanwhile, back at the lounge, Tracy Klein had just arrived. As guest services manager, she was technically Martin Hale's superior, but rarely contradicted him. She walked briskly through the doors, pulling Martin aside. "Is it true you called security on a passenger who had a first-class boarding pass?" Martin didn't flinch. "I didn't like the way he was acting. I've dealt with this before. Fraud, upgrades bought through shady third-party sites, mismatched names, expired memberships. I went with my gut." Tracy paused. "Your gut," Martin replied. "That's how we keep this lounge clean." "Clean," Tracy repeated. The word sat in her mouth like sour milk. She wasn't comfortable with what had happened, but she wasn't ready to take a stand either. "Let me look into it," she said. And like that, she walked away. Not because she wanted to ignore it, but because admitting what had just occurred would mean acknowledging something much deeper about the culture they upheld. Outside in the terminal, Elijah returned to the main concourse. Paul had offered to file a complaint on his behalf, but Elijah declined. "Not yet," he said. "I'd rather handle this in my own way." He returned to gate C7, still on time for his flight. But as he approached, he noticed something different. His name had been removed from the manifest. He showed his boarding pass to the gate agent, a young woman named Chloe, who looked confused. "This ticket's been marked as invalidated by lounge administration." "I'm sorry, sir. I don't know what happened." Elijah didn't argue. He simply stepped back, nodded once, and sat down in a chair by the window. His seat was gone. His money wasn't refunded, and no one from the airline had come to explain. The quiet rejection was complete, but the story wasn't. A few seats down, someone had been filming again. A man in a blue hoodie posted the clip online, this time from a wider angle, Elijah standing calmly as the gate agent tried to explain, his expression unreadable, his dignity intact. The video caption read, "I don't know who this man is, but the way they're treating him is wrong." Within the hour, the video had been stitched, re-uploaded, and shared by multiple influencers, without music, without filters, just raw footage and a growing sense of collective outrage. Across town, in a modest apartment in Inglewood, Kimberly Young, the flight attendant from earlier, was scrolling through her phone during a break. She saw the video of Elijah and stopped cold. She recognized his face. Not from today, but from a shareholder briefing she'd once attended through a staff live stream months ago. "That's Mr. Grant," she whispered. "That's the guy who backed our employee wellness program." She didn't know everything, but she knew enough to feel her stomach twist. He wasn't just a customer. He was someone important. And back at the airport, Elijah made one final call before leaving the terminal. The voice on the other end picked up quickly. "Yes, sir?" Elijah spoke clearly, without emotion. "Schedule the boardroom. I want every partner present. No delays." Then he stood up, slipped his phone into his coat pocket, and walked out. Calm, silent, collected. The cameras kept rolling, the views kept rising, and for the people who thought they'd gotten away with another quiet act of exclusion, they were about to learn exactly who they had dismissed. By 9:15 a.m., the gate to Flight 2281 to Seattle had closed. Passengers were settling into their seats. The jet bridge retracted, and the aircraft began its slow crawl backward from the terminal. Elijah Grant wasn't on board. His seat, 2A window, lie flat, was now occupied by someone else. Someone who likely had no idea what had just unfolded in the terminal over the last hour. Elijah stood a few yards back from gate C7, hands in his coat pockets, his eyes steady on the plane rolling away. He didn't move, didn't blink. The image felt surreal. He'd paid for the seat, had the paperwork, had followed every rule, but none of that mattered. because one man decided he didn't belong. He sat down again in the same seat by the window where he'd waited before. The terminal buzzed with voices, clinking coffee cups, boarding calls echoing over loudspeakers. But inside Elijah's mind, it was quiet, not empty, just focused. The kind of quiet you feel right before something begins. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way most people expect. There was no raised voice, no legal threats, no shouting into the void. What he felt was colder, more exact, and far more dangerous than outrage. It was clarity, a clear understanding that this wasn't new, that he'd seen this pattern before, and that maybe, just maybe, today was the day it would finally break. A few feet away, a man in a charcoal suit paced nervously near a trash bin, phone in hand. He'd been watching Elijah ever since the incident outside the lounge. After a few minutes, he walked up and said, "Sir, I just wanted to say, I saw what happened. It didn't feel right. I didn't speak up, and I probably should have." Elijah turned, studied him for a moment, and nodded. "I appreciate that." The man looked embarrassed, as if he wasn't sure whether to offer help or just disappear. "I mean, it's not the first time I've seen stuff like that, but I've never seen someone handle it the way you did." Elijah gave a faint smile. "Sometimes silence says more than shouting." The man walked away. Elijah checked his phone again. A message from Laura Brennan had come in. "Boardroom confirmed for 2 p.m. Rachel and Andre are in. Legal files prepped." Another from Rachel Lynn followed right after. "Do you want to go public yet? We're getting media requests already." Elijah stared at the message, then typed back, "Not yet. Let them keep guessing." Across the airport. In Terminal 6, Kimberly Young sat in the crew lounge between flights. Her phone buzzed again. Yet another video of the man she'd passed earlier. And now, she knew for certain, it was Elijah Grant. She remembered the last investor town hall the airline had held, the one where she'd stayed late after work just to watch. Elijah had stood at a podium and talked about long-term vision, fairness in hiring, investing in employee wellness, and making equity more than just a marketing word. And now, here he was, treated like a criminal by people who didn't even bother to scan his boarding pass. Kimberly turned to her coworker and said, "That man they kicked out? He's not just some random flyer. He's someone who believed in this company, who put money into it, and they threw him out like trash." Back at the terminal, Elijah rose slowly from his seat. He checked his watch. It was just after 9:30 a.m. He had 5 hours until the emergency board meeting, 5 hours to decide how far he wanted to take this. He made one more call, to someone named Victor Marsh, a longtime investor and silent partner. The two hadn't spoken in months. When Victor picked up, his voice was cautious. "Elijah? This a courtesy call? Or is something going down?" Elijah responded with his usual calm. "I'm moving to take control. I'd like your vote." Victor let out a low whistle. "They really messed up, didn't they?" Elijah didn't answer. He didn't need to. Just then, a chime from Elijah's phone pulled his attention. One of the videos from earlier had crossed the 1 million view mark on TikTok. No commentary, no music, just a straight clip of Elijah standing silently, being told by Martin Hale that his boarding pass looked suspicious, and then being escorted out. The comment section had exploded. Hundreds of people were writing about their own experiences. Others were tagging journalists, lawyers, public figures. No hashtags, just raw outrage and quiet solidarity. One comment stood out. It read, "I don't know who this man is, but I'd follow him into battle," another said. "The fact that he never raised his voice makes this 10 times more powerful." And a third, "He didn't just get kicked out. He got dismissed like he didn't matter. And that's what hurts most." Elijah read each one. not with satisfaction, but with a kind of solemn awareness. The world was watching now, not because he shouted, but because he didn't. Somewhere nearby, a group of Altura Airways interns watched the same clip over lunch. One of them said, "Isn't that the guy who gave the diversity grant last year?" Another replied, "If it is, they're done." Word was moving faster than the airline could react. No press statement had been issued, no apology, no suspension. They were still treating it like an isolated misunderstanding, just another travel inconvenience. But it wasn't. This was the moment the needle moved, not because Elijah had power, but because he had dignity, because he didn't demand attention. It came to him. At 10 a.m. sharp, Elijah walked out of the terminal, not in a rush, not looking back. He had a private car waiting outside, sent by his assistant, who had already cleared a path through Seattle traffic. He slid into the back seat, phone in hand, and looked up only once at the sky. The same sky his plane had just lifted into. The plane he wasn't allowed to board, not because of a missing document, not because of a mistake, but because someone decided he didn't fit the image. That was fine, because 5 hours later, Elijah Grant wasn't going to ask for a seat at their table. He was going to walk in and take the head of it. By 1:47 p.m., the conference room on the 32nd floor of Grant Equity's Seattle headquarters was bathed in soft afternoon light. But inside, tension crackled like static. Elijah Grant stood at the far end of a long glass table, sleeves rolled just slightly up his forearms, his face calm but unreadable. Across from him sat Rachel Lynn, the firm's razor-sharp legal counsel, flipping through a binder marked Altura Holdings, Immediate Action. Next to her, COO Andre Carter, tall, ex-military, and forever skeptical, leaned back with his arms folded. Laura Brennan, board liaison, and Elijah's longtime corporate strategist, had just wheeled in a cart with 3 laptops synced to the real-time investor dashboard. No one spoke yet. Elijah was reviewing a single document, a revised share purchase agreement that would, if executed in the next hour, take Grant Equity from a 22% minority stakeholder in Altura Airways to a 28.4% controlling interest. A silent takeover. Clean, swift, legal. Andre was the first to break the silence. "You sure about this?" Elijah didn't look up. "Yes." Rachel nodded slightly but added, "It will be public by tomorrow morning. Once the buy triggers SEC filings, everyone will know who just took control." Andre pressed. "You've always kept a low profile with Altura. If we do this, there's no going back. You'll be at the front of this storm." Elijah finally looked up. "Steady. I'm already in the storm. They just don't know it yet." There was no anger in his voice, just clarity. Cold, exact, earned clarity. The video from LAX was still climbing in views, 3.2 million now on TikTok, another 1.1 on X, with no hashtags and no official statement from the airline. That silence was costing them more than they realized. Shareholders were nervous. Internal staff leaks had begun. 2. Someone had sent Rachel a copy of an internal email from Altura's VP of Customer Experience, calling the incident regrettable but non-disruptive. Rachel had read that line aloud and then slammed the folder shut. Non-disruptive? They don't even realize what's about to hit them. Elijah hadn't reacted. He was used to being underestimated. That's what gave him the upper hand. At exactly 2 p.m., the screen on the wall lit up with the digital boardroom. The emergency shareholder session had been called less than 5 hours earlier. Yet every major investor logged in on time. The CEO of Altura Airways, Walter Reeves, appeared on screen first. His background was a generic office with an airline-branded banner behind him. His smile was tight, forced. "Mr. Grant, didn't expect to see you today," Elijah replied coolly. That makes two of us. Walter cleared his throat. We're aware of the video. It's unfortunate. We're still gathering facts. Rachel cut in. Which facts? The part where your employee told him, and I quote, "You people don't belong here?" Or the part where you invalidated a ticket purchased directly through your own system? Walter flinched but didn't answer. Another face appeared on the screen. Victor Marsh, a major silent partner. He didn't say much, just gave Elijah a slight nod. That was the final vote needed. Elijah opened the folder in front of him and handed a document to Laura. Effective as of this moment, Grant Equity assumes majority voting power over Class B shares and retains authority to initiate board restructuring within Altura Airways. Walter's voice rose slightly. Hold on, this isn't the process. You can't just walk in and... Elijah interrupted. Actually, I can... And I just did... On another screen, a recording of the original lounge incident began playing. Not edited, no commentary, just raw footage. Martin Hale's voice came through the speakers. You people always try to sneak in here. Walter froze. Victor leaned forward. That's the man you invalidated? Rachel answered. Yes, and he's the man who kept your airline from collapsing after the pandemic. Check the 2021 recapitalization file. You'll see his signature. Andre, watching the feed, added, You wanted to talk about disruption? This isn't disruption. This is correction. Tracy Klein joined the meeting late. Her camera was angled too low, and she seemed flustered. She tried to speak. Mr. Grant, if I had been there personally, I would have intervened. I can assure you. Elijah stopped her. You weren't there. That's the problem. No one in leadership ever is when these things happen. And when they do hear about it, they bury it. Call it a misunderstanding. Make it go away. Walter leaned back, clearly rattled. So what now? You fire people on live stream? No, Elijah said quietly. I hold them accountable in boardrooms. He paused, then looked directly into the camera. This isn't revenge. This is responsibility, and it's long overdue. There was a beat of silence. Then Laura clicked the final confirmation on the screen. The boardroom software refreshed. Elijah Grant now held the controlling vote. For the first time in the airline's history, the man in the room they once dismissed was now the man running the show. Rachel looked over at him, exhaled, and said, It's done. Elijah didn't celebrate. No fist pump, no applause, just a quiet nod. Now we begin. On a nearby monitor, a live ticker showed Altura's stock price dropping in real time. Not because Elijah was now in charge, but because investors had seen the videos and were demanding answers the old leadership couldn't give. A reporter from a major outlet had just posted, Sources confirm Elijah Grant has assumed control of Altura Airways after viral video sparks shareholder revolt. Outside, the clouds had started to roll over Seattle, casting long shadows across the boardroom windows. But inside, the light had shifted, not because Elijah had taken power, but because, for the first time, it was no longer being denied to someone who had always earned it. The meeting adjourned quietly. No congratulations, just stunned silence on one end and steady resolve on the other, as the screens powered down. Andre finally broke the tension with a deep breath. Well, I guess now we see who really belongs. Elijah didn't respond. He was already standing, already moving toward the door, already thinking 10 steps ahead, because this wasn't the end, it was the pivot. And tomorrow, the real restructuring would begin. The following morning at 8:00 a.m. sharp, the Altura Airways executive wing felt unusually quiet. Too quiet for a company now gripped by a growing public scandal and a boardroom takeover. Upstairs, phones rang unanswered, emails were piling up, staff whispered in corners, and in the center of it all, CEO Walter Reeves sat stiffly at the head of the long oak table in the executive conference room, his fingers tapping rhythmically against a cold ceramic mug. Across from him sat Tracy Klein, her blazer too crisp, her smile too forced. She kept glancing at the door like she expected someone to storm in. Martin Hale, red-eyed and strangely confident for a man on the verge of public disgrace, sat with his arms folded, acting like this was still a misunderstanding. Look, I said some words. Maybe they came out wrong. But people are acting like I burned the place down, he muttered. Walter didn't reply. He didn't have the energy. Not after last night's late calls with PR firms and his own legal advisors. Not after seeing the news banner that read, "Viral video sparks shareholder coup at Altura Airways." Then, the door opened, and everything in the room shifted. Elijah Grant stepped inside, not with drama, but with quiet intent. He wore a dark tailored suit, no tie, collar open, and a look on his face that was unreadable. But his presence filled the room before he even spoke. Laura Brennan followed behind him, flanked by Rachel Lynn and Andre Carter, carrying folders, laptops, and something heavier, the weight of a moment that had taken years to arrive. Walter stood halfway, awkwardly. "Mr. Grant," he said, voice measured. "We weren't expecting you this early," Elijah simply said. "You should have—" The room was silent for a full breath. Then Elijah pulled out a chair at the far end of the table and sat down, not at the side, not as a guest, at the head. Tracy cleared her throat, her voice a bit too high. "Mr. Grant, before we begin, I just want to say, if I had known who you were, I never would have allowed what happened yesterday." Elijah turned to her, calm as ever. "That's the problem. Tracy, you treat people based on what you know about them, not who they are." She flushed red but said nothing. Martin, smug, spoke up. "So what is this? Then, a witch hunt? You're here to make an example out of me because I followed protocol?" Rachel cut in, sharp. "Protocol? You never scanned his ticket. You never even verified his ID before calling security. What protocol was that?" Martin scoffed. "I went with my gut. Something didn't feel right. We've had fraud before." Elijah looked at him now, fully. "And what exactly didn't feel right? Martin?" Martin blinked. "You're asking me to say it? I think we all know what this is about." Walter jumped in, trying to steer things back. "Let's not turn this into a political moment. We're here to solve a problem," Elijah replied. "No, Walter, we are the problem, and we've ignored it long enough." He reached into a slim folder in front of him and pulled out a timeline, complete with screenshots, internal memos, and incident reports. "This isn't about one day at a lounge. This is about a pattern, a culture, one that protects people like Martin and silences passengers like me." Rachel took over from there. She presented evidence of at least 4 similar complaints over the past 2 years, all involving first-class black passengers being denied access to lounges, flagged for security checks, or removed from boarding lists without explanation. None were escalated. None were investigated. One passenger even received a form letter apology that mistakenly used the wrong name. "These aren't isolated incidents," Rachel said. "They're part of your system." Tracy tried to salvage what she could. "We can commit to training. New oversight. I'll draft a memo today." Elijah shook his head. "Memo won't fix this." Andre, who'd stayed quiet until now, leaned in. "The shareholders already voted. You've got 24 hours to turn over operational control. Elijah's not just visiting. He's in charge." Martin let out a short, dry laugh. "You think you're going to run an airline because of one viral moment?" Elijah didn't flinch. "I helped save this airline when it was a week from bankruptcy. I brought in the capital. I restructured the debt. I hired the consultants you claimed you couldn't afford. You didn't know who I was, but I've been here the whole time. You just never looked close enough." That landed like thunder. Walter sat back slowly. His expression shifted from defensiveness to something closer to regret, or maybe just fear. "So, what now?" he asked. Elijah glanced around the room. "Now we restructure, top to bottom. You've had the power all these years, and you abused it. I'm not here to mirror that. I'm here to replace it." Tracy rose from her seat. "Are you firing me?" Elijah looked at her evenly. "I'm relieving you of your duties effective immediately. We'll be conducting an independent review of guest relations and internal response protocols. You'll be notified through legal." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Martin stood too, indignant. "This is a hit job. This is politics." Elijah stood as well. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "You kicked me out of a lounge because of how I looked. Then you tried to rewrite the story. That's not politics. Martin, that's bias. And you no longer work here." He turned to Walter last. "You can stay, for now, but you report to me. We'll review your tenure within the month." Walter nodded once, quietly. There was nothing left to argue. As Tracy and Martin left the room, heads low, silence took over again. Elijah turned to Laura. "Let's notify the staff. No media, no press releases yet. This is for the people inside first." Laura nodded. "Right away." Andre clapped a hand on Elijah's shoulder as they walked out. "You've been patient for a long time, brother," Elijah replied. "Patience builds leverage." Outside, the sky was clear, but inside the airline, a storm had passed, and the air was finally different, because the man they thought didn't belong was the one who owned the building. By noon that same day, the ripple effect had turned tidal. The internal memo had gone out at 10:45 a.m., quiet, concise, and unignorable. Effective immediately, Elijah Grant assumes interim executive authority over Altura Airways. Martin Hale and Tracy Klein have been removed from their positions pending review. That memo spread like fire inside company Slack threads, email inboxes, and whispered break-room conversations. But it wasn't just the staff talking. The media had caught wind by mid-morning, and by lunchtime. The headlines read like a corporate obituary: "Altura ousted executives after viral lounge incident." "Investor-turned-CEO moves fast to restructure airline culture." And "From humiliation to control, who is Elijah Grant?" The once dismissed passenger had become the face of a reckoning. And now, he stood at the center of it, back at Altura headquarters. The energy was tense, uneven. Some employees felt vindicated. Others were scared. A few resented the shift entirely. In the HR wing, a mid-level manager named Denise Monroe had her arms crossed as she leaned against a desk, venting to a colleague. "I get it, okay? It looked bad. But this is overkill. We've all had bad interactions with customers. Doesn't mean they should run the company the next day." Her co-worker, Javier, a soft-spoken operations analyst, looked up from his screen. "Denise, that wasn't just a bad interaction. That man was treated like a criminal, and no one in power stopped it." Denise shook her head. "Yeah, but now everyone's walking on eggshells. It's like we're being punished for breathing wrong," Javier replied, quietly. "Maybe we should have been paying more attention before today." Upstairs, Elijah wasn't gloating. He was working. The first item on his agenda wasn't public messaging or revenge. It was internal trust. "Start with the ground crew," he told Andre, "and the cabin staff, the people who've been ignored longest." Kimberly Young, the flight attendant who recognized Elijah back at the terminal, had been invited to a listening session that afternoon. She hesitated at first. She wasn't used to being in rooms like that, but when she walked into the conference room and saw Elijah seated at the table, no suit jacket, sleeves rolled up, hands clasped together like he'd been waiting for her. She relaxed. "Ms. Young," he said warmly, "thank you for showing up. I heard what you told your team yesterday, and I wanted to hear more." Kimberly blinked. "You actually heard that?" Elijah smiled slightly. "I hear a lot of things now." She sat down, still cautious. "Look, I'm just a flight attendant. I'm not trying to make noise." Elijah leaned forward. "Sometimes, it takes a quiet voice to show people how loud the problem really is." And then he listened, as she told him about passengers who were overlooked, crew members who were discouraged from speaking up, and silent moments that piled up into a culture of exclusion. By the time she finished, Elijah didn't give a speech. He simply said, "You're not just a flight attendant, you're the beginning of something better." Meanwhile, Tracy was already packing her office under HR supervision. Her departure was swift but not quiet. She stormed past a group of younger employees who'd just seen the news on their phones. One whispered, "Is that her?" Tracy turned around, icy and sharp. "Be careful celebrating too soon. Every pendulum swings back eventually." She walked off without another word, but not before someone caught the moment on video and sent it to a friend. It circulated online within an hour. Public opinion had already turned. People weren't just supporting Elijah. They were dissecting the culture that let this happen in the first place. Inside the communications team, chaos reigned. The PR director, shaken and unsure whether to defend or distance, turned to Elijah during a meeting and asked, "Do you want a press release? A statement? Should we reframe the narrative?" Elijah answered plainly, "We're not reframing anything. The video speaks for itself. Our job is to make sure nothing like it ever happens again." Someone else asked about crisis consultants. Elijah shook his head. "This isn't a crisis to spin. It's a truth to face." In the same room, Walter Reeves sat silently near the window. The former CEO had not yet been formally removed, but his role had been reduced to strategic advisory, a phrase that barely masked the reality. His era was over. He glanced toward Elijah, who was outlining a new code of conduct policy, and finally spoke. "You know," he said, "we built this company from the ground up." Elijah turned, measured. "No, Walter, you built the shell, but you never protected the people inside it." Walter didn't reply. He just looked away. Later that afternoon, Elijah took a brief walk through the executive floor alone. He paused at the lounge access desk, now empty, and looked around. The space was silent. Just yesterday, he had stood here as a paying customer, told he didn't belong. Now he stood as the man writing the rules. A young employee, new, maybe an intern, passed by and hesitated. "Mr. Grant?" Elijah turned. "Yes?" The intern looked nervous but spoke anyway. "My dad showed me that video last night. He's worked in aviation 30 years. He said you reminded him of what leadership used to look like." Elijah nodded. "Tell him thank you. And tell him we're bringing that back." Back on the main floor, the staff huddled around a screen as a local news station aired a breaking story. Altura Airways faces leadership overhaul after discrimination. Video goes viral. The anchor reported Elijah's name for the first time, explaining his investment role and the quiet financial backing that saved the airline during the pandemic. "The man who was kicked out," the anchor said, "was actually one of the men who built the foundation beneath it." In homes, airports, and phones across the country. That sentence struck deep, especially among viewers who had seen too many stories that ended with silence, and not enough that ended with justice. By the end of the day, Elijah sent one final email to the company. It wasn't corporate. It wasn't jargon. It read, "To every employee who has ever been talked over, passed by, or told they weren't enough, you are seen. We begin again, together. And just like that, the healing started, not with noise, but with truth, 3 weeks later. The first-class lounge at LAX looked almost the same on the outside. Polished marble floors, brass signage, the soft hum of business travelers shuffling past. But inside, everything had changed. A new staff rotation had been quietly introduced. Uniforms were the same, but attitudes weren't. At the check-in desk stood a young black woman named Lena, recently promoted from within. She carried herself with quiet confidence as she greeted each traveler with a warmth that couldn't be faked. On that particular afternoon, as the sun cast long golden streaks through the terminal glass, Lena looked up from her podium and paused. A man in a dark suit approached. Not hurried, not boastful, just steady. It was Elijah Grant. No entourage, no press, just him. She straightened slightly and said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Grant. Welcome back." Elijah smiled, gentle and sincere. "Thank you. It's good to finally be let in." He stepped through the lounge doors, this time without resistance, without suspicion, and without anyone second-guessing whether he belonged. As he moved across the space, a few heads turned, not out of confusion, but recognition. Some nodded politely, others looked down, embarrassed, as if they too had watched the video and now realized they'd once looked away when they shouldn't have. Elijah wasn't there to be seen. He was there to observe, quietly. He took a seat near the far window where sunlight spilled across the floor, opened his tablet, and scrolled through a list of new employee initiative proposals, programs that focused on training, transparency, mentorship, programs Kimberly Young had helped draft. That same afternoon, she was being interviewed for a new executive position within the Passenger Experience Division. Elijah had personally requested it, across the country. Ripple effects were still unfolding. Altura Airways had launched an internal review board, composed of employees from every department, ramp agents to cabin crew, legal to logistics, not just top-down reform, but bottom-up inclusion. A short video summarizing the new structure had been posted to the company's website. In it, Elijah appeared briefly, seated in front of a simple blue backdrop. He didn't recite talking points. He spoke plainly. "This isn't about optics. It's about making sure that what happened to me, and what's happened to so many others, quietly, invisibly, doesn't happen again." The reaction from the public was measured but powerful. A clip from the statement aired on morning news, followed by a commentary segment hosted by a retired airline executive who'd once dismissed inclusion initiatives as cosmetic. He said plainly, "I was wrong. What Elijah Grant did wasn't about punishment. It was about restoration. And he did it with restraint most of us wouldn't have shown." Meanwhile, social media kept doing what it does. Sandra Evans, the woman who had first posted the original video, had gained thousands of followers overnight. But she wasn't chasing fame. She used her newfound voice to share stories submitted by others, service workers, nurses, delivery drivers, and travelers who'd been overlooked or mistreated in similar ways. She titled the series, "The Ones They Didn't See." In one post, she wrote, "What I filmed that day wasn't just injustice. It was a man deciding to stand still while the world watched, and from that stillness, something shifted." One afternoon, at a community center in South LA, a group of teenagers watched that clip as part of a youth leadership seminar. The facilitator, a former teacher named Renee Thomas, paused the video and asked, "What do you see in this man's face?" A young boy in the front row raised his hand. "He's not mad," he said. "He's just done," another girl added. "But he's still respectful. That's harder than yelling." Renee nodded. "That's power with purpose. That's what we're building here." Back at LAX, Elijah was preparing to leave the lounge when a mother and her daughter walked in. The mother, dressed in business casual, stopped suddenly when she recognized him. The daughter, maybe 10 or 11, bright eyes and curly hair, tugged on her sleeve and whispered, "Mom, is that him? The man from the video?" Elijah heard her and smiled gently. The mother stepped forward, slightly nervous. "Mr. Grant, we just wanted to say thank you. My daughter saw everything, and now she knows that dignity looks like this." Elijah leaned down, looked the girl in the eyes, and said, "It also looks like you. When you speak up, never forget that." She nodded, beaming, as if the moment would live in her memory forever. On his way out of the terminal, Elijah passed by the exact spot where it had all started. The lounge entrance, the security desk, the small waiting area where he'd once sat watching his plane leave without him. A young janitor was wiping the glass near the door. He looked up, startled, then smiled. "Sir, I just want to say what you did. It meant something," Elijah replied. "So did what you just said." That night, in a quiet home office lit by a single desk lamp, Elijah opened a handwritten letter. It was from a former Altura employee, a retired pilot who had left the company years ago after facing racial hostility from within. The letter read, "I never thought I'd see someone like me sitting where you're sitting. But you didn't just take the seat. They tried to deny you. You rebuilt the whole table." As the clock neared midnight, Elijah closed the letter, leaned back in his chair, and looked at a framed photo of his late father, a former mechanic who'd spent 3 decades under jet engines, never once stepping foot in first class. "You were right, Dad," he whispered. "Change doesn't come from rage alone. It comes when we carry the weight and still choose to stand." And with that, he turned off the light, because justice had been served, not loudly, not violently, but with clarity, control, and the kind of quiet that commands attention, the kind of quiet that never had to ask for permission. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in dignity, accountability, and the power of staying calm under pressure. Until next time, thank you for watching.